It didn't happen all at once, but in bits and pieces, small signs that I ignored until they became too glaring to overlook. My wife, Linda, and I had been together for over a decade when things began to feel different. We met when I was 30, and I fell in love with her kindness and down-to-earth nature. We built a life together, had kids, and found a rhythm, balancing work and family. Linda was a legal assistant, and I had a solid career as an engineer. The early years were happy, we had simple dreams and made them a reality. We had 3 wonderful children and, on the surface, everything seemed perfect. About 5 years ago, Linda started working more late nights. She said her job was demanding more of her time, especially since her boss was dealing with some personal issues. She assured me it was all work-related, and at first, I believed her. I didn't want to question her loyalty because we had always been able to talk openly. But as the months passed, things started to feel off. Linda's work trips became more frequent, and each time she returned, she seemed more distant. I chalked it up to stress from work, the responsibilities of motherhood, and the pressures of life. We had 3 kids to raise, and they were in their most demanding years, teenagers with their own needs and challenges. I didn't want to add to Linda's stress by confronting her about my suspicions, so I kept quiet. I didn't want to believe she would ever betray me. One evening, I came home early from work, something I rarely did. The house was quiet, too quiet for a family with 3 children. I called out to Linda, expecting her to be home, but there was no response. The kids were with my sister that evening, so it wasn't unusual for the house to be silent. I decided to check her office, assuming she might be catching up on work or relaxing after a long day. But when I entered the office, it was clear she wasn't home. I noticed her phone on the counter, something she rarely left behind. Out of curiosity, or maybe something deeper, something I'd been avoiding, I picked it up. Linda was always careful about her phone, but this time, it was unlocked. I don't know why, but I decided to scroll through it, and that's when I found the first crack in our marriage. There were messages from a man I didn't recognize, a man named Robert. The conversations were subtle at first, nothing alarming, but then I found messages hidden away, encrypted in folders that didn't belong in a marriage built on trust. They were meeting up regularly, and the details lined up with the nights Linda had said she was working late or out of town on business. I felt my heart sink, and a pit formed in my stomach as I pieced it together. This wasn't just a passing fling, this had been going on for 5 years. My world shattered that evening, but I didn't confront her immediately. I needed to know more. I spent the next few days gathering evidence, checking phone records, piecing together her movements, and what I found was even worse than I had imagined. Robert had 4 children of his own, and while my wife was out, working late, she had been spending her time with him, playing house with his family, and pretending that our life was a lie. I was crushed, but more than that, I felt humiliated. How had I not seen this? How had I been so blind? Linda came home later that night, and I watched her, noticing the way she avoided eye contact, how she barely looked at me, how her phone never left her side again. I knew then that our life together had been slipping away from me for years, and I had been too trusting to see it. When I finally confronted her, the truth came out, but not in the way I expected. She tried to explain it away, saying it wasn't serious, that she still loved me, and that it was just a mistake. But how could it be a mistake when it lasted 5 years? When she had built a separate life with this man and his children while I stayed home, taking care of ours? I left that night, driving for hours, trying to clear my head, but the betrayal gnawed at me. I couldn't escape the image of them together, the life she had shared with someone else, while I was left holding on to a marriage that no longer existed. The worst part wasn't even the affair itself, but the realization that I had been living a lie for so long. Linda had taken something sacred, our family, our home, and destroyed it, piece by piece, over 5 years. I drove aimlessly that night, the city lights blurring past me as my mind tried to process the weight of what I had uncovered. The car's hum did little to soothe the storm inside. It was like I was outside of myself, watching the life I had known disintegrate from a distance. I pulled into a parking lot, unsure of where I was or how long I'd been driving, and just sat there, staring out at the empty world around me. 5 years. It wasn't the number that haunted me, it was the way she had built 2 lives in parallel, seamlessly moving between our family and his. I couldn't shake the image of her playing the role of wife and mother with Robert and his kids, while I stayed behind, trusting, oblivious. Had she been laughing at me this whole time? Each time she kissed me goodbye, told me she loved me, was any of it real? Eventually, I returned home, though I don't know why. The house felt hollow, cold, as if her betrayal had seeped into the walls, the very air. Linda was asleep when I walked in, curled up on her side of the bed as if nothing had changed. I stood there for a long time, watching her, wondering if I had ever truly known her at all. She looked so peaceful, so innocent, but I knew better now. The woman I had loved, the mother of my children, had been living a double life. The next few days were a blur of routine, work, the kids, pretending. I couldn't bring myself to disrupt their lives just yet. They had no idea what was going on beneath the surface, and I didn't want them to suffer because of Linda's choices. But every time I looked at her, every time she smiled or tried to make small talk, all I could see was the deception. It felt like I was living with a stranger. One night, a few days after I had discovered the messages, I couldn't take it anymore. The weight of it was suffocating me, and I needed answers. I waited until the kids were in bed, the house quiet, and found her in the kitchen, cleaning up after dinner. I stood in the doorway for a moment, watching her like I had that first night, but this time, I wasn't going to stay silent. "We need to talk," I said, my voice low but steady. She looked up, a slight frown creasing her forehead. "What about?" I stepped closer, my heart pounding in my chest. "About you. About Robert." The color drained from her face, and she froze, her hand hovering over the sink. For a moment, neither of us said anything, the silence stretching between us like a chasm. Finally, she set down the dish she was holding and turned to face me. "Jack, How long?" I interrupted, not wanting to hear whatever excuse she had lined up. "How long have you been seeing him?" Her eyes darted away, unable to meet mine. She swallowed hard, and I could see the struggle on her face, the war between her guilt and whatever she was about to say. 5 years, she whispered, her voice barely audible. I felt a wave of nausea wash over me, even though I already knew the answer. Hearing her say it out loud, confirming what I had pieced together, made it real in a way I wasn't prepared for. 5 years. 5 years of lies. 5 years of her choosing him over me, over our family. "Why?" I asked, my voice cracking despite my efforts to keep it steady. "Why him? Why, this?" Tears welled up in her eyes, but I didn't care. I couldn't afford to feel sorry for her, not after everything. She took a deep breath, and for the first time in a long time, I saw the cracks in the facade she had built. The mask of the perfect wife, the perfect mother, was slipping. "It just happened," she said, wiping at her eyes. "I didn't mean for it to go this far, Jack. I didn't plan this. But I was unhappy. I felt lost. And Robert, he made me feel alive again. He made me feel wanted." I stared at her, my hands clenched into fists at my sides. "So what? You just decided that our life, our family, wasn't enough for you? You wanted more, so you went behind my back? You built a whole other life with him, with his kids, and expected me to never find out?" She flinched at the anger in my voice, but I couldn't stop. The floodgates had opened, and everything I had been holding in was pouring out. "Do you know what this has done to me? What you've done to our kids? You've been lying to all of us for years, Linda. How could you do that? How could you live with yourself?" "I didn't want to hurt you," she whispered, her voice breaking. "I didn't want to hurt anyone." "Well, you did," I said, my voice cold. "You hurt all of us." For a moment, she said nothing, just stood there, her head bowed, her shoulders trembling. Then, finally, she looked up at me, her eyes red and swollen from crying. "I'm sorry, Jack," she said softly. I know that doesn't fix anything, but I'm so sorry. I wanted to believe her. I wanted to believe that the woman I had loved for so many years was still in there somewhere, that this was all just a horrible mistake. But I couldn't. The damage was done. She had destroyed our marriage, our family, and there was no going back from that. I don't know if I can forgive you, I said quietly, the truth of it sinking in as I spoke the words. I don't even know if I want to. She sobbed then, covering her face with her hands, but I couldn't comfort her. I couldn't do anything but stand there, feeling the weight of everything we had built together crumbling around us. That night, I slept on the couch. The next morning, we told the kids that things were going to change. They were too young to understand the full scope of what had happened, but they could sense that something was wrong. Linda moved into the guest room, and I tried to figure out what to do next. Divorce was inevitable, I couldn't see any way to salvage what we had left. In the weeks that followed, we lived like strangers under the same roof. The kids asked questions, but I didn't have the heart to tell them the truth yet. I needed time. Time to figure out how to pick up the pieces of my life, time to decide what kind of future I wanted for myself, and for my children. But one thing was certain, the life I had known was gone, and I was going to have to rebuild from the ground up. After weeks of living in this strange limbo, with Linda in the guest room and our conversations reduced to little more than small talk about the kids or bills, I had finally begun to accept the inevitable. The house felt like a hollow shell, filled with echoes of what used to be, but I had started to come to terms with it. The divorce papers sat in my desk drawer, unsigned but ready. I was going to file them the next day. That night, I sat in the living room, staring blankly at the TV. The kids were asleep, and Linda had been unusually quiet all evening, staying in her room. I thought maybe she was starting to understand that there was no going back from what she had done, that I couldn't forgive 5 years of betrayal. But just as I was about to turn off the TV and head to bed, Linda emerged from the guest room. She stood in the doorway for a moment, looking pale and small, her eyes red-rimmed like she had been crying again. I barely glanced at her, thinking it was another attempt to apologize, to plead with me one last time. I was too tired for another emotional breakdown. Jack, she said softly, her voice trembling. Can we talk? I sighed, running a hand over my face. What is it now, Linda? We've said everything there is to say. She didn't respond right away, but when I looked up, I saw something different in her expression. There was a heaviness in her eyes, something deeper than the usual guilt and desperation. For a brief moment, I felt a flicker of concern. Please, Jack, she whispered. It's important. I motioned for her to sit down, though I didn't move from my spot. Go on. She hesitated, her hands wringing together nervously, and then, almost as if she had rehearsed it, she said, I didn't want to tell you like this, but I have cancer. The words hung in the air like a grenade that had just been pulled from its pin. I blinked, trying to process what she had just said, but it felt like my brain had short-circuited. Cancer? What? I croaked, my throat suddenly dry. Tears started to well up in her eyes, and she looked down at her lap, like she couldn't bear to meet my gaze. I've been going to the doctor for months now. I didn't want to worry you, especially with everything else that's been going on. But I found out a few weeks ago. It's serious, Jack. The room seemed to spin around me, my heart pounding in my chest. Linda, what are you talking about? You never said anything about being sick. I didn't want to burden you, she said, her voice cracking. I didn't want to make things worse between us. I was hoping it would turn out to be nothing, but it's stage 3. Stage 3. The words hit me like a punch to the gut. Suddenly, the anger and resentment that had been boiling inside me for weeks felt like it had been doused with ice water. I stared at her, my mind racing with a million thoughts, trying to make sense of what she was telling me. Why didn't you tell me sooner? I asked, my voice barely above a whisper. She shook her head, wiping at the tears that were now streaming down her face. I didn't want you to feel like you had to stay with me out of pity. I know I messed up, Jack. I know I've hurt you, and I don't deserve your forgiveness. But I didn't want you to think I was trying to use this to keep you. That's not why I'm telling you. For a moment, I couldn't speak. The woman I had spent the last few weeks hating, the woman I was preparing to divorce, was now sitting in front of me telling me she was dying. My hands shook, and my mind scrambled to figure out what to do, what to say. You're serious? I finally managed, still trying to grasp the gravity of what she was saying. She nodded, her face contorted with pain. I'm starting treatment soon. The doctor says there's a chance, but it's going to be tough. Chemo, surgery, everything. I wanted to handle it on my own, but I don't think I can. I felt a wave of guilt wash over me. All of the anger, the hurt, the betrayal, it was still there, but now it was tangled with something else, something that made me feel sick to my stomach. She had lied to me, betrayed me, but this? Could I really leave her now? Could I walk away from her while she was battling cancer? The silence between us stretched on, and I could see the desperation in her eyes, the way she clutched at her hands like she was holding onto the last thread of hope. I just thought you should know, she whispered. Before you make any decisions about us. I stood up, pacing the room, trying to think clearly. But my mind was a storm of conflicting emotions, anger, pity, confusion. I couldn't reconcile the woman who had lied to me for years with the woman sitting in front of me now, pleading for understanding. I need some time, I finally said, not knowing what else to do. Of course, she said softly, wiping her eyes again. Take all the time you need. I don't expect anything from you, Jack. I just didn't want to hide it anymore. I nodded, my head spinning, and walked out of the room, needing to be anywhere but there. I found myself outside, the cool night air hitting my face as I tried to breathe through the whirlwind of emotions. Cancer. Was she really sick? Or was this some kind of desperate attempt to stop me from leaving, to manipulate me into staying with her out of pity? The thought sickened me, but I couldn't shake it. After everything she had done, everything I had discovered, how could I trust her now? But if she was telling the truth? The next few days were torture. Every time I saw Linda, I felt the weight of her words pressing down on me. I started researching cancer treatments, trying to figure out what she might be facing, and I even considered going with her to her next doctor's appointment. But something nagged at me, something I couldn't shake. There was no medical paperwork lying around, no doctor's bills, nothing to indicate that she had been going through this ordeal in silence. It didn't add up. So, one afternoon, when Linda was out running errands, I did something I hadn't done before. I checked her personal emails. I hated myself for it, but I had to know. And that's when I found it, a draft email, never sent, addressed to a friend. In it, she wrote about her fear of losing me, how desperate she was to fix things, and a line that made my blood run cold. I don't know what else to do. If I tell him I'm sick, maybe he won't leave me. Maybe he'll stay. The truth hit me like a freight train. She had lied. Again. This time, about something so serious, so manipulative, that I could barely comprehend it. She was willing to fake cancer, cancer, to keep me from walking away. That night, when she came home, I confronted her. I showed her the email, and for the first time in weeks, I saw real fear in her eyes. But I wasn't afraid anymore. The anger I had been holding back surged to the surface, and I let it all out. How could you? I shouted, my voice shaking. How could you do this? After everything, this is how far you're willing to go? To lie about being sick, just to keep me here? Linda broke down, sobbing uncontrollably, but it didn't matter anymore. I had seen her for who she truly was, someone I no longer recognized, someone I couldn't trust, not with my heart, not with anything. I want you out of this house, I said, my voice cold and final. We're done. And this time, there was no going back. After I confronted Linda about her fake cancer lie, I thought that would be the end of her deceit. but I had underestimated just how far she was willing to go to keep control over the situation. Her manipulation hadn't ended with me, it was about to get far worse, this time, involving our children. It had been a few days since I told her I wanted her out of the house, and the divorce process was finally moving forward. The papers were signed, and I was working with my lawyer to figure out custody of the kids. I wanted full custody. There was no way I was going to let her poison their minds with the same lies and deceit she had fed me for so many years. But Linda, true to form, had other plans. One evening, as I sat in the living room, my youngest daughter, Clara, came in, looking anxious. I could see something was bothering her, the way she twisted her fingers together and kept glancing at me nervously. "Daddy," she said, her voice small, "can I ask you something?" I turned off the TV and gave her my full attention. "Of course, sweetheart. What's on your mind?" She hesitated, her eyes darting toward the hallway where Linda's room was. "Mom said something, about us. About what's going to happen." I felt a knot form in my stomach. "What did she say?" Clara bit her lip, clearly struggling with whether to tell me or not. Finally, she whispered, she said if you don't stop being mean to her, she's going to take us away. She said we'll go live with her friend Robert. And that you'll never see us again. The room seemed to spin around me as Clara's words sunk in. Robert, the man Linda had been having an affair with. She was threatening to take my children to live with him. My heart pounded, anger and disbelief bubbling up inside me. I forced myself to stay calm, for Clara's sake. "Clara, listen to me," I said, kneeling down to her level. "Your mom can't do that. She can't take you away from me, okay? No matter what she says, you and your brother and sister will always have me. No one is going to take you away." Clara nodded, but I could see the fear in her eyes. Linda had planted this seed of doubt in her, and it enraged me that she was using our children as pawns in her twisted game. After Clara went to bed, I sat in the dark, my mind racing. How could Linda even consider saying something like that? Threatening to take the kids away, to uproot their lives and move them in with her lover? She was using them to manipulate me, trying to hold them over my head like a weapon, knowing full well they were the most important part of my life. It was disgusting. The next morning, I confronted her. I waited until the kids were off to school, not wanting them to overhear the fight that was sure to come. I found her in the kitchen, drinking coffee as if she hadn't just terrified our daughter the night before. "Linda, we need to talk," I said, my voice tight with barely controlled anger. She glanced at me over the rim of her mug, her face a picture of false innocence. "What now, Jack?" "I talked to Clara," I said, watching her reaction carefully. "She told me what you said. About taking the kids to live with Robert. About me never seeing them again." I saw a flicker of something in her eyes, guilt, maybe, but it was quickly replaced by defiance. "I was just trying to make her understand that things are changing," she said, setting down her mug. "She's scared, Jack. I was trying to prepare her." Prepare her, I could barely keep my voice steady. "You told our daughter that you were going to take her away from me. You threatened to move them in with your lover and cut me out of their lives. How is that preparing her?" Linda crossed her arms, her expression hardening. "I have every right to take them if you keep making this difficult." I took a step closer, my hands shaking with rage. "This isn't about making things difficult, Linda. This is about you trying to manipulate me, using the kids to hurt me because you know they're the only thing I care about anymore. You're trying to scare them, to turn them against me." Her jaw tightened, and she turned away, her hands gripping the edge of the counter. "What do you expect, Jack? You're pushing me out of their lives. You're trying to get full custody like I don't exist, like I'm not their mother. Because of what you've done," I said, my voice rising. "You've lied, cheated, and now you're using our kids to get back at me. You don't get to pretend to be the victim here." She spun around, her eyes flashing with anger. "I'm doing what I have to do, Jack. You're trying to take everything from me, our family, our kids, our life. You think I'm just going to sit back and let you rip them away from me? I couldn't believe what I was hearing. She was delusional, twisting everything to make it seem like I was the one in the wrong. She had destroyed our family, not me. But she didn't care about that. She only cared about winning, about control. You're not taking them, I said through gritted teeth. I won't let you. Her expression shifted then, a cold smile curling on her lips. We'll see about that. Robert has more money than you think, Jack. He can give me and the kids a good life. Better than what you can. I stared at her, the full weight of her threat sinking in. She wasn't just trying to manipulate me, she was seriously considering taking the kids and running off with Robert, the man she had been cheating with for years. She was prepared to rip our family apart even further, all to hurt me, to make me pay for refusing to forgive her. I'll fight you, I said, my voice low but filled with resolve. I'll fight you in court, and I'll win. You won't take them from me, Linda. Not after everything you've done. For a moment, her confidence wavered. I could see the fear in her eyes, the realization that I wasn't going to back down. But then she straightened, crossing her arms again, her face hardening. Do what you want, Jack. But don't think for a second that I'm going to let you walk away with everything. I'll make sure you regret this. I walked away then, unable to stand in her presence any longer. I could feel my heart pounding in my chest, the anger boiling over. But I couldn't let her win. I couldn't let her use our children as leverage in this sick game. That night, I contacted my lawyer again, telling him everything that had happened, her threats, her manipulations. We needed to move faster. I needed to protect my kids from her, from the toxic environment she was trying to create. If she was willing to go this far, there was no telling what else she was capable of. The days that followed were tense. Linda still tried to play nice in front of the kids, but I could see the cracks forming. She was getting desperate, and I knew it was only a matter of time before she made another move. But I was ready. I wasn't going to let her destroy my relationship with our children. I wasn't going to let her use them as pawns to control me. She had taken enough from me already, my trust, my love, my peace of mind, but she wasn't going to take them. Not if I had anything to say about it. As the tension between Linda and me reached its breaking point, the days that followed were a constant battle of wills. I could see the desperation in her eyes every time we passed each other in the hallway, like she knew she was losing control but refused to admit it. The kids were caught in the middle of a storm they didn't fully understand, and that was what hurt me the most. They were the innocent ones in all of this, and yet Linda was determined to drag them down with her. My lawyer had assured me that things were in motion. The courts would take my side if I could prove Linda's instability, her threats to take the kids and disappear, her lies about cancer. But it didn't make the waiting any easier. Every night, I stayed awake, fearing she might do something drastic. And every morning, I wondered if this would be the day she tried to leave with them. Then it happened. One Friday afternoon, I came home early again, just as I had the day I first discovered her affair. The kids were supposed to be at my sister's for the weekend, and I expected to find Linda sulking in her room or maybe out with her friends. But when I walked through the door, I saw something that stopped me cold: Linda, packing suitcases, not just her own, but the kids too. The living room was in chaos, clothes scattered everywhere, toys thrown into bags haphazardly. Clara's favorite stuffed animal lay on top of a pile like it had been ripped from her bed. Linda, what the hell is going on? I demanded, stepping into the room, my heart pounding in my chest. She froze, turning to face me with a wild look in her eyes. I'm leaving, Jack. I'm taking the kids. We're going to Robert's. The world seemed to tilt around me, and for a moment, I couldn't breathe. This was it. This was the moment I had been dreading, the moment she would make good on her threat. She was going to take them and disappear into a life I wasn't part of, dragging them into her twisted reality. No, I said, my voice low but filled with a kind of fury I had never felt before. You're not taking them anywhere. She straightened, her eyes narrowing. You can't stop me, Jack. I'm their mother. I have every right to take them. I stepped forward, closing the distance between us. You don't have the right to tear them away from their home, from their life. They're staying here. With me. Her face twisted with anger, and for the first time, I saw the mask slip. You think you can just win, don't you? You think you can take everything from me, make me the bad guy, and walk away like the hero? Well, I'm not going to let you. I'm not going to let you ruin my life and take them from me. They're not yours to use as pawns, Linda, I said, my voice steady but filled with the weight of everything we'd been through. You've lied, manipulated, and hurt them. You've hurt me. You want to run off with Robert? Fine. But you're not dragging our kids into that mess. Tears welled up in her eyes, and for a moment, I thought I saw the woman I used to love, the one who was kind, thoughtful, the one who had built a life with me. But then it vanished, replaced by the cold, calculating person she had become. You don't understand, she whispered, her voice trembling. I can't be alone. I can't do this without them. The weight of her words settled between us, and for the first time in weeks, I saw her vulnerability. This wasn't just about the kids, it was about her fear of being alone, her fear of losing everything. But it was too late. I couldn't let her emotional turmoil destroy their lives. I'm sorry, Linda, I said quietly. But you made your choices. You've put them in the middle of something they didn't deserve. And now, it's over. She shook her head, tears streaming down her face, but I could see the defeat in her eyes. She knew she had lost. She knew there was no going back. I don't want to fight you, I said, my voice softening. But if you try to take them, I will. And you'll lose. She turned away from me, her shoulders slumping in defeat. For a long moment, neither of us said anything, the weight of everything crashing down on us in the silence. Then, finally, she spoke. I'm leaving tomorrow, she whispered. Without them. I felt a strange mix of relief and sorrow. It was over. She was giving up, walking away from the life we had built, the family we had raised together. Part of me had hoped it wouldn't come to this, that maybe, somewhere deep down, we could have found a way to salvage something for the kids' sake. But there was no saving this marriage. There was no fixing what she had broken. The next morning, Linda packed her things and left. I stood at the door as she walked out, her suitcase trailing behind her, her head down. The kids were at my sister's for the weekend, and when they came back, she would be gone. I told them she was moving out, but I spared them the ugly details. They didn't need to know everything. Not yet. The weeks that followed were filled with legal proceedings and paperwork. Linda signed over custody to me without much of a fight, knowing that she didn't have a leg to stand on. Robert was out of the picture now. Apparently, he had moved on to someone else, leaving her alone to pick up the pieces of her shattered life. She had visitation rights, but the kids stayed with me. The house was ours again, a place of peace instead of the chaos and deceit Linda had brought into it. It wasn't easy at first. The kids had questions, and there were days when I felt like I was drowning in the weight of being a single father. But we adjusted. Slowly, we rebuilt. We found a new normal. One evening, a few months after Linda had left, Clara came to sit beside me on the couch. She was quiet for a while, her head resting against my shoulder, before she finally spoke. Are we going to be okay, Daddy? She asked, her voice small but hopeful. I wrapped my arm around her, pulling her close. Yeah, sweetheart, I said softly. We're going to be okay. And for the first time in what felt like forever, I believed it. We were going to be okay. The nightmare was over, and my children were with me, where they belonged.